Ready for talks and possibly much more. North Korea's state-run news agency says the regime is fully ready for both dialogue and war and stress it's prepared to respond to any US provocation with a prompt counterstrike. The Korean Central News Agency also took aim at the US over what it said were moves to stifle thawing inter-Korean ties, also targeting the annual joint military exercises between Seoul and Washington. The North slammed the acting US ambassador to South Korea for saying the postponed drills would be held in April. The North's outburst comes a day after US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the White House is willing to work with the North Korean leadership and Washington is waiting to hear from Pyongyang that the regime is ready to talk. That said, Tillerson also stressed that the Trump administration will keep up its campaign of maximum pressure on North Korea.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has been saying that he is willing to talk with North Korea. They want to negotiate, but North Korea has to show a willingness to at least discuss those programs, and North Korea has rejected that idea. In fact, Kim Jong-un has just spent the last year launching ballistic missiles and developing that program, with some analysts saying that North Korea's ballistic missiles now have the range to hit U.S. cities on the East Coast. The U.S. and North Korea have kept open lines of communication, especially regarding Americans in North Korean prisons, though the U.S. is still trying to isolate North Korea and trying to ensure that North Korea and convince North Korea to come to the table and discuss those weapons programs. The State Department is leading what the administration calls its pressure campaign. It's even considering a naval blockade of North Korea to ensure that countries and others aren't trying to help North Korea circumvent a number of the sanctions that international bodies have put in place. The administration is trying to convince countries to halt their business and diplomatic ties with North Korea, and the State Department and officials here claim that that campaign is working. But this is all ongoing while North Korea continues what some have dubbed its charm offensive at the Winter Olympics in South Korea. Analysts say that is simply just an attempt by North Korea to try to drive a wedge between the United States and South Korea. And analysts say they are looking to see after the Olympics if the United States and South Korea continue with those joint military exercises that they suspended during these Olympic Games.
U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has reiterated that the White House is willing to work with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. During an interview with CBS on Sunday, he stressed that although military options remain on the table, a diplomatic resolution was best and that Washington is waiting to hear from Pyongyang that the regime is ready to talk. However, Tillerson also said that until then, the U.S. will keep up its campaign of pressure and sanctions. He said the US is not using a carrot to convince Pyongyang to talk, but using large sticks, and added that North Korea keeping its nuclear arsenal buys the regime nothing other than further diplomatic and economic isolation. This was further emphasized by U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, who at a Republican fundraiser on Saturday said that despite the recent thawing of tensions on the Korean Peninsula, there is no change in policy towards Pyongyang, and the strongest measures will remain until North Korea decides to give up its ballistic and nuclear missile programs. North Korea watchers say the possibility of US-North Korea talks are now closer than ever, but with Pyongyang having no interest in giving up its nuclear weapons, for now it's unlikely to progress further than exploratory talks.
North Korea has no reason not to take part in exploratory talks. The US also has nothing to lose. If something does come out of them, it will be great, and even if there's no progress, the US will continue its pressure campaign.
Meanwhile, Pyongyang is keeping up its anti-US rhetoric. North Korea's state-run newspaper, the Rodong Sinmun, accused the Trump administration on Monday of obstructing the improvement of inter-Korean relations with acts of continued pressure. The commentary also pointed to the joint US-South Korean military drills, which are set to return after the Olympics.
How did you assess Tillerson in this interview? Do you think he's on the right track?
Well, good to be with you, Martha. I think he is on the right track in terms of the broad theme of trying to pursue this diplomatically. But the problem is, if you look at South Korea being very much detached now from the Trump administration's tougher approach to dealing with North Korea, if you look at the timeline, probably less than 6 months now to a credible ICBM plus warhead capability on the North Korean side, and the Chinese still not doing really anywhere near enough, I think his notion of how successful diplomacy is at the moment is one that is not borne out by the facts.
Yeah, and as you point out, the time frame it looks to be somewhere around 6 months. I've heard as early as this summer, and the big looming issue is to have that nuclear-capable warhead on an ICBM missile. And the capability looks like they're heading in that direction. So it's not like we have all the time in the world here. If we need to step it up, what do you recommend?
Well, look, no, I think that's the point. Now, I think the critical element here is if you look at the history of late-term development of ICBMs, it's about the heat shields, it's about re-entry, it's about targeting, it's basic stuff. But what should we do? Well, I think the first thing President Trump needs to do is to tweet at President Xi and say, listen, China, you have failed the United States here, you pledged to be a partner, you have not done that. So we're going to sell a lot more high-end equipment to Taiwan and India. We're going to push for India to enter the nuclear suppliers group. We're going to change the balance of power. Also, sanctioning Chinese financial entities that act as cutout, as clearinghouses for the North Koreans that keep them alive, and interdicting, quite frankly, cargo vessels that are providing for some limited exports and imports for the North Korean economy.
That's interesting. So, I mean, I can imagine the backlash if the president started tweeting foreign policy at President Xi. But you think that's exactly what he should do?
Well, yes, because what else are we going to do? If we're running down the clock, the only other option is the military option, which is prospectively catastrophic, or we live with a North Korea that can threaten ICBM destruction of an American city. And so I think, no, you've got to, the Chinese are realists, you've got to play them at their own game.
Play hardball.
And play hardball.
Yeah.
And that's the way diplomacy will work.
So the North Koreans to the Olympics for just a moment in the 30 seconds that I have left. The scary suggestion is that some of them, because of their failure to bring home a medal, could see some very serious ramifications, including ending up in a work camp. Do you think that's a realistic possibility for them?
Fortunately, at least for those North Korean athletes, I don't think so now, because the functional issue is that North Korea has seen the diplomatic opportunity with the South Koreans especially to say, look, we're not that bad, and that helps them buy time again on the slower track of diplomacy instead of tougher action.
On the upside.
Keeping maximum pressure on North Korea, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has reiterated that the Trump administration will continue to stand up against North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Addressing the crowd at a Republican fundraiser in Texas on Sunday, Pence said the strongest measures will be put on North Korea, adding that there will be no change in their stance until the North decides to give up its ballistic and nuclear missile programs. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said in an interview with CBS that he's listening for signs that North Korea is ready to engage in direct talks. Tillerson added that while he's listening, he's not sending a lot of messages back, with nothing to say at this point. With the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games thawing relations between the South and North Korea, it's been speculated that direct talks between Washington and Pyongyang could be on the horizon after months of tension and heated rhetoric. 이승재, 아리랑 뉴스.